It's unfortunately everyone tells me that. There's some countries where you go to. I've had the same experience in other countries, but particularly in Germany. People say there's a lot of, but it's very difficult. These books are to a certain extent the text is slang driven, and to read it with something like full comprehension requires a knowledge of a number of real American subcultures. And someone told me that in the German translation of Neuromancer, the Rastafarian spacemen speak some sort of strange German hippie dialect that would convey something very different. But how do you do, since Rastafarian is a dialect of English, how can you carry it over into another language? The translation's a bad problem. It's one of the things that's wrong with words.
Do you think your books should be untranslated? Nobody should be translated.
Oh, no.
Just like Jimmy Jarmusch and his films.
No, I like to, I think if my books weren't translated, I wouldn't get to visit countries like Austria.
Maybe.
This is my first time in the, how shall I say, German-speaking countries. It's very interesting. I've had a lot, over the years, I've had a lot of German friends.
Well, I was very astonished to hear that you don't understand much about technology. How does it come in such a
this will sound very glib, but it seems to me that what I do is I listen to the language of the technologists.
Without understanding, more or less.
Yeah, without understanding, and I then, or with a limited sort of comprehension, but I then proceed to poetically deconstruct the jargon from a position of ignorance and to construct something for myself that it seems to me. It's really, actually, that was certainly true with Neuromancer and with my early short stories. It's increasingly less true because people are forcing a certain degree of computer literacy on me. It's simply by osmosis, by attending a conference like this. But it's in a funny sort of way, it's not something I'm terribly interested in, unless someone can show me a given application that excites or more likely horrifies me. I'm not the sort of person who'd go and listen to an entirely theoretical lecture about computers, and I don't play with computers for fun to any extent. I don't hook up my modem and go on bulletin boards. You can play in the United States a lot. You can meet all sorts of people and have very intense relationships with total strangers. It's really a remarkable situation there, and it's very much unpoliced. It's like it's quite free still. But I don't do that. I have to spend 5 or 6 hours a day sitting in front of a computer using it as a word processor, which is all I ever use it for. And when I'm not doing that, I'd rather ride my bicycle or go to a bar or just do something that's not that. Well, I know that the cyberspace, the initial concept of cyberspace that I came up with for the short story Burning Chrome to some extent had its origin in watching young teenagers in video arcades. Because simply in watching them in their body language, it seemed to me that they were experiencing this space within the machine. And in fact, that was the purpose of their activity. They were blotting out reality. And at some point, it also occurred to me that at a subatomic level, something was taking place that had no existence in the real world. I mean, if you look at the photons are leaving the monitor screen, activating neurons which travel to the brain. Other neurons travel down the arm. The kid pushes the button, and electrons move. through a circuit, something changes on the screen. This is all taking place somewhere else.
Well, this is the idea of checking into the cyberspace.
Yeah, essentially, but cyberspace for me was also, when this is something that the computer people don't seem to have gotten, really. It was simply, for me, it was a metaphor for the hyper-saturation of media. You know, if you sit 3 inches from a high-resolution television screen with Sony Walkman earphones and the sound turned up really loud, you're in there. You're certainly not aware of anything else that's happening. You don't have to do it that way. You can simply sit and watch soap operas and have no idea what's going on in the world around you. That's one of the purposes that television serves, or also any sort of media can serve. I do it myself with European fashion magazines. You know, I can just sit and read magazines and forget about it. Look at the pictures. I've always, I think it's the ultimate, some way it's the ultimate public honor for a science fiction writer to have a word that you invent become the word that's actually used in your language to describe something that you only imagined. The famous case of that in the United States is Robert Heinlein, who used the name Waldo as a lowercase noun to describe a feedback prosthesis, so that even by the early 1960s, those crude artificial hands in nuclear laboratories in the United States are called Waldos. The people who call them that, you know, lowercase. It went into the language. Most of the people who use it don't know that it came from a Heinlein story. The Neuromancer game, that was an aspect of a film rights deal. The people who purchased or leased, as the case may be, the film rights for 5 years also had certain ancillary rights. So I really had nothing to do with the game, but as it's happened, the computer game is the only thing.
Have you ever played?
No. It takes. I asked one of the manufacturers. I said, "How long would it take me to play this thing?" And he said, "Well, at your level, about 90 hours." And I said, "Well, no, thanks. I've started it up a few times, but I just don't know. I really sort of don't know how to do it, and it's never really looked that interesting to me. Although I understand that, in fact, as computer games go, it's not bad. It's more cerebral and less violent. And someone told me something that I do like about it, if in fact this is true. Someone told me that the instructions lie, and that in the higher levels of the game you learn to cheat. And that's the secret of the game. You learn to not do what it tells you to, and just proceed in another direction and to lie to the things that are coming on and talking to you, which I think is very funny and quite appropriate. I think, well, something I sort of tend to agree with just about everything Bruce had to say about it. I think the first place you'll experience the sort of high quality cyberspace involvement will be in a game arcade of some kind. And I think people could make it. Even that little machine, that crude little machine upstairs, which I'm quite fond of because it's made out of pieces of disassembled technology. You know, it's made of Sony Walkmans and things. And they've just caught it in their bicycle helmets and stuff. It's got a great charm to it. If you put one of those out on the street corner and had it operating and you're standing there saying, "Hey, you want to look at this thing? $10. Or you could get a lot of money. I bet a lot of people would pay $10 when they saw that image. They'd pay $10 for 2 minutes or something. In fact, that's what Eric, the guy who invented it, should do with that. I suppose it could be done, but it perhaps...
You suggested it.
Well, actually, though, there's a lot of real, there's a lot of downhand biochemical drug use in my books. One of the funny things in the United States is I'm often criticized in the States for having a feature where people smoke, and Americans say this would never happen. But I don't know. If they came up with something, it would be. Actually, that's an idea. The idea of the neuroelectronic drug is something that curiously enough, had been explored by more or less traditional conservative science fiction writers in the 60s, people like Jerry Pournelle and Larry Niven, and they came to the conclusion, more or less that I came to, and that's why I've never bothered to write about it much. If you have someone who's had an electrode permanently implanted that will stimulate the pleasure center to optimum every time they plug it into a wall circuit, given the dynamic of addiction that we can see with, even traditional drugs like alcohol, those people would just die.
They tried with monkeys.
Yeah, they tried with monkeys.
They
just
forgot
die. Yeah, they forget to eat and they die happy. Okay. Yeah, there's an expression in American hacker circles as people talk about having neck burn. And neck burn is something that I've seen people with it. It is almost like jet lag. It's the result of staying plugged in to hypermedia for too long. Like if you stay up for 12 hours talking to people, networking with people all over the world and getting all this stuff, you come out of it, your affect is shot. You can't relate to real people anymore. You can't really focus your eyes. It's kind of interesting thing to see. You live in a country that produces a lot of its own high quality top-end products, for instance, automobiles. But I don't, Nobody, and where I live, if you're not driving a Japanese or German automobile, you're driving something that's going to break down all the time. And anyway, isn't nearly as satisfying as those products. And so the German products are by and large too expensive for me to afford. Although I sometimes prefer the design. So basically everything in my house that's a consumer durable that a burglar would want to steal is Japanese. And this has been true for it's been true for maybe for us for the last 15 years. So for that reason the Japanese presence is obvious to me. Thank you. There's a big interest in Japan. I think it may have peaked as a cultural phenomenon. There are two things happening now. The people in the sort of corporate yuppie people have accepted Japan's position in the United States vis-a-vis the industries of our two countries, and those are interlinked in a fascinating way. The entire American military security effort is completely dependent on high-speed Japanese semiconductors, which we do not have the capacity to manufacture in the United States in the number or quality necessary to keep our planes in the air or our telepresence powered top secret tanks or whatever we have. We need those semiconductors, and we can't make them ourselves. So there's some very ugly parts of the American industrial society are in a state of panic. But that's basically because they're not very efficient. It doesn't have much to do with the Japanese. Actually, in Neuromancer, the dirty Japan is at one point I have case wonder why in this glittering, very clean Japan they maintain this one filthy little neighborhood. And none of the answers that he comes up with satisfy me. He thinks that maybe the Yakuza wants this to remind them of their humble roots, or maybe it's a kind of experimental zone for illegal technologies. But it made no sense. I just wanted to use a sort of Terry and the Pirates Hong Kong sleazy Oriental set, but it really doesn't make much sense in terms of what Japan is. Although Japan does have its sort of funky parts, you just don't see them much as a tourist. The parts of the Japanese infrastructure that aren't very well maintained because they've saved up all the money. Capital, so the highway system is not in great shape. Or if you get off the highway system, the country roads are often. You think, why can't they fix the roads? They've got all the money, and so broken down. There's the actual school buildings, I'm told, and of course, the housing, a lot of it is actually quite substandard. The people in the housing may have good jobs, expensive little things, but they're living in sort of falling down post-World War II concrete buildings. So, well, that's a curious thing, because I wrote those books before I'd been to Japan. I've only been to Japan once, and then only briefly to Tokyo, but the sense I had of it was that it was a turn-on for them, because they got to see themselves, I don't know, here's a kid living in Tokyo, and it's really not very much like Detroit, and he's not really going to go out and act out his hostility. I mean, there's not much you can do. It's a very orderly society. So I give them a version of it that's like real, it's like a Hong Kong martial arts movie happening in the kid's own backyard. And I didn't do that deliberately or cynically. It just seemed to be a side effect. Well, they grew, Dick grew up, he was from a different generation. It's, I don't know, we're somewhere between, I suppose we're somewhere between Dick's distrust and Heinlein's enthusiasm, Asimov's enthusiasm, Clark's enthusiasm, Marvin Minsky's enthusiasm. And Marvin Minsky is very much of a type with some of the older, smarter science fiction writers. And they have this sort of, hey, let's do it attitude, and I think that too sometimes. I think it would be great if you did. Well, yeah, in a way you could say that it's simply, as a writer, I often felt that cyberspace was just a very good plot device to allow me to do all sorts of things that were very difficult. It replaced, not only did it replace the spaceship of a traditional science fiction novel, but it replaced the super drugs of the Dickian New Wave novel. And it would also replace the horses of the cowboy novel. It's just a way to move things around. And when I first discovered it, when I was working with it, I do remember thinking, wow, this is not going to. Well, there's a religious aspect at the end of Neuromancer, and when Wintermute and Neuromancer attain union, apparently, to judge by the text, which is really the only access to the story that I have, they attain a sort of cybernetic godhead is attained, and momentarily the entirety of cyberspace is conscious of itself, and conscious and self-willed. And at the end of Neuromancer, that's what's happening. In this case, has the discussion with the thing that this entity comes in case there's an evil god. I forget what it says. It sort of shrugs. But by 7 years later, when Count Zero starts, God's gone. The Godhead shattered, and it seems to me that what the text suggests is that it shattered into all these little self-willed subprograms that proceeded to fight with one another, and that's something that has parallels in a number of world religions, particularly primitive religions. Something I had a lot of fun with was playing with the difference between, with the ambiguity of whether or not these things are Haitian entities or what they're doing there, or whether they're simply sub-programs that think they're Haitian entities, which I would imagine would be the case. But yeah, I suppose I began to explore some sort of spiritual dimension there. I mean, given that people have been having spiritual experiences, all along anyway, I don't think they're going to quit.
So in some way,
Sorry, you don't want it.
No, I just ran out. I'm sampling. No, I needed a mouth. Sampling.
No, empty.
Sampling mustards. Mustards are good. I was never into it to quite the extent that he was. I was a bit too young. But no, I don't. Well, no, I don't really think of my. To the extent that those books have a metaphysical aspect, I don't think I'm particularly pursuing my 60s past. There's some experiences I had during the 60s which definitely found their way in there. You know, the experiences of being quite poor, young and quite poor, and feeling totally disenfranchised from the power structure in my own country and going and living in a foreign country, although very similar under difficult circumstances. I think that was essential to me as a writer, because otherwise I'd simply be writing from a fairly ordinary middle-class existence, which is what I now have. So it's more the feeling of the reality of having been on the street for a little while is much more important. I spent most of late 60s in Toronto, and after I met my wife, we went for briefly, like for less than a year, through Southern Europe, which was all that we could afford. We had to go where we could get lots of drachma or pesetas for our dollars. So we were mostly in Greece and Spain, but I think almost everyone under 30 years old from Northern Europe was also in Greece and Spain. So.
I want to ask you another question about Alien 3. You wrote the script?
I wrote a script. I don't think, yeah.
What are the differences of your script and the other two parts?
No one would ever...
And what is the differences? And would your script realize?
Well, I wouldn't have been too terribly happy with my script being realized anyway, although I would have made a big hunk of... I would have gotten a production bonus. I would have made more money. As it was, I was paid very well for doing the draft. But I wrote it to the specifications of the three men who essentially control the Alien franchise. So, it's sort of like going to work for McDonald's and saying, hey, I'm going to do some sushi tonight, boss. And the guy says, we do hamburgers. There's 2 pieces of bread, a thing in the middle. There was no, I wanted to explore, my initial impulse was to try to explore the origins of the biology of the alien and to try to make sense of what the sort of internal contradictions between the two films. And that's what I went to the initial meetings thinking, I'm going to figure out what that thing is doing in a big spaceship and what these queens are and all of that, this and that. We don't want to do that. We just want more aliens. And they gave me a storyline. The only thing in it that I particularly liked was that they had suggested in the little 5-page outline they gave me that aside from the corporate, the company that seems to own everything, be the dominant power, aside from this capitalist space world, there was also some sort of socialist. This is really pretty Glasgow. Probably wouldn't work out. There was a socialist space world, which I populated with people from African countries, Central American countries, and North Vietnamese people, all sort of working together in a kind of super Cuba, with their own sort of falling apart kind of rundown spaceships and a space station that was completely lined inside with sort of Diego Rivera murals of these socialist triumph in space. And I played off the conflict between these two groups, and in the end of my version, the good guys are rescued by a Vietnamese space fighter, female Vietnamese space fighter pilot who knows that she's dying of radiation because she's just escaped in her ship from the station as it suicides to kill the aliens or aliens breeding. It was the ending was very nice because you thought they'd had it, and then so out of nowhere comes this little Brucknerhaus thing with this Vietnamese girl that kills the aliens, takes them away, and then she can't speak English and they can't speak Vietnamese, and the Hicks, the android, says she's dying, she's dying, it's radiation. And they say that surviving people say, oh, there's nothing we can do, and Hicks says something like, well, why is that? You found your enemy now. Quit doing this shit.
What you think about Walter Hill, one of the producers?
He's a very nice man. He's a very sane. Personally, he's a very nice man. As Hollywood folks go, he seems eminently sane. He seems happy. He's a happy man. And he's not, that in itself is pretty incredible. And he's got a really, really nice car. They all have great cars. They have.
Which one?
Some kind of Mercedes that
A German one.
Yeah, a German. Well, I shouldn't say it. I get them confused. It's non-Japanese. It's from a Germanic country, but it's been very subtly altered by these strange shops in Los Angeles, so that I think there's only the very, very fine rims around the wheels are ordinary chrome, and it's a black car, and all the rest of the chrome has been black chrome. So we're very impressed by that sort of thing. We don't get to see it. It's quite spooky, very spooky looking little car.
You've got which one is your car?
My car is actually it's a Dodge. It's a Canadian. It's a Dodge Caravan. It's like a modern. It's a real boring car. It's because I got 2 kids. It's like a contemporary station wagon. One of those ugly cars that looks like a pig. You know those ugly pig-nosed cars, and it has a Mitsubishi engine. It's an American Canadian car, but you pay more money, you get a good Japanese. Oh yeah, that was just blind luck. That was the most wonderful thing. I was drunk in a bar in Seattle at a science fiction convention, and there were two drunken WACs, American women, ex-WACs, women had been in that's what they used to call women in the American Army, and they'd been key punch operators in the Pentagon. And they were talking, and I was sort of eavesdropping. They were talking about being key punch operators, and one of them said, "Oh yeah, we'd put these great Star Trek games into the system. And they were like on missile control boards, and they'd build these Star Trek games in and sit there and play these homemade video games all day." And the other woman said, "Yeah, but they'd come in and wipe them every day, but what they were really looking for were those viruses." And I just kind of heard it. What viruses? She said, "I don't know how it works, but it's this program that these people make, and it gets into the computer, and they're really scared of it." But the kind of funny thing was when I took it home and put it in the story, I said it's a virus program that behaves like a virus. And I didn't know anything about it in terms of computers, but I knew something about viruses. I knew approximately, had a very crude model of how viruses act when they enter the body. And that turned out to be quite accurate. In fact, it's turned out to be more accurate than anyone knew, because one of the basic ideas in the new and extremely wonderful and scary field called artificial life, and there's a hot buzzword for you. The artificial life people basically say, well, you can't program artificial intelligence, but you can grow it. And the way to grow it is to put a lot of these viruses and things into a cybernetic environment and just let them do their thing. Leave it alone, let it cook, and eventually you'll have something that is something. It won't be something that you design. That's interesting. Well, it is in a very literal sense because there are people designing virtual animals that live in virtual environments. There's one now called Cootie. That's a little bug that lives in a virtual environment, has virtual enemies and virtual food, and teaches itself, gets smarter. It's like a way of watching an AI program get smarter. And every time Cootie gets eaten by the thing, it generates another one of himself that remembers why it was eaten. So it's evolving. I didn't see Tron when I came up with that, and as evidence, let me cite the fact that the first stills, to be color stills at least, I'm pretty sure the first color stills from Tron that were ever published were published in the same issue of Omni magazine that published Burning Chrome or Johnny and the Mind? No, Burning Chrome actually, which is where Cyberspace came from. So they appeared simultaneously, so I hadn't seen.
Must have been a big surprise because.
Oh, I was pissed off. I was pissed off when Blade Runner came out in the middle of Neuromancer. Sort of walked out of the theater.
What was your original imagination of the cyberspace?
Well, it's like I've tried to describe it as in books. It's pretty much the original description in the books. It's an iconic architectural space. I saw which I suppose I don't know how to describe it. In some sense, it's like Art Nouveau. It's rectilinear and classical in form. I could have described it as some like H.R. Giger grotto, great drooping forms, but it's all neat little things. So the idea being that you can cruise through and identify things visually and go there, and which is really the only original thing that I've given there. People say that I invented cyberspace, but that's not really true. There had been virtual environments in science fiction before, most of which I found out about after the fact of writing Neuromancer. But the idea I came up with that this novel was of a navigable, iconic information space. Oh, it wasn't as though I would go back and say, how does Ballard make those deserted swimming pools feel so sexy or anything. But I just kept them in mind as examples of excellence, as things to imitate. There are some examples of imitation, particularly in Neuromancer, but I won't tell you where they are.
No, of course not.
they're just now they're the parts of the book that I'm most unhappy with. But there were certain writers that I held, I sort of just held as examples of people who had done something. Architecture is something that I know a very little bit about. I have a very, I don't know, even to say I have a dilettante's interest in architecture is exaggerating it, but it's something that I notice. And I do know a very little bit about the history. And one of the things that I consciously did while I was writing those books was to try to correct things I saw as deficiencies in American science fiction as it's usually written. And there's really no sense in American science fiction of architecture, although I think for one reason or another architecture is terrifically important in science fiction, if only because we have to describe urban environments and artificial environments.
Science fiction, for instance, maybe not in America, but in the German-speaking countries, has always had that label
it's a bad label.
Yeah, the bad label.
Well,
it's badly labeled. It's badly labeled too. The idea of we don't have quite. I don't know. It's so maybe in something good that remains from the populist roots of American culture, which God knows have been responsible for all manner of atrocities. One of the good things about having populist roots is that the high culture hasn't got a lot of power because nobody buys it. It has to be largely subsidized by the state. So in America, in the last 10 or 20 years, it has been possible for some science fiction writers to cross into the broader field of literature, and there have also been some people who've written science fiction and have deliberately avoided the label Kurt Vonnegut comes to mind. And I don't know whether this is true, but it's sort of a legend in American science fiction publishing that Kurt Vonnegut's book contracts, even when he was writing cheap paperback publishers, it began by specifying that the books could never be labeled as science fiction, whether or not they had aliens or flying saucers or whatnot. It's more of a problem. It seems to be more of a problem in Germany than in any other country I've run into so far, because the response from the German editions was absolutely the most minimal, considering the size of the market. I hear less from some of the Scandinavian publishers, but at least they got it. They would get it right away. And Germany was, I think, the last country to come in. I think when I was in my talk, I used the term literary naturalism as opposed to realism, which is, at least in American literary theory, it's an academic description, but it's one that I accept. And the naturalist novel in the United States has fallen on, until recently, had fallen on very sad days. It simply wasn't being written and it wasn't being sold. I'm speaking, in terms of what, the mainstream of literature. And so something comes along like Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities, which is designed to be a classic naturalist novel. I mean, he's taking Zola as his model and trying to describe certain types of lives in New York. And to an extent, I do that too, and that's where my fiction differs. One of the ways in which my fiction differs from an awful lot of the science fiction that's published in the United States, because it attempts to be naturalistic. It's self-conscious in a sense. It can't. I don't know where. There's certain things that are still very popular in science fiction that I just can't do. I can't do certain kinds of militaristic power fantasies and thinly veiled parables of sexual domination. I'm going to do them. I'm not going to thinly veil them, but I can't do that, and neither can Sterling. And we differ from a lot of the stuff that's being written in science fiction in the United States in that regard. We're self-conscious. We know what we're doing. A lot of the people who are creating really bad kitsch fantasy science fiction, which is still the great pity of science fiction is that the majority of it is as bad as the academics tell you it is. It's worse because they don't even have the patience to read it. And I know people who actually read it. Sometimes I read it myself, and a lot of it is god-awful. It's appalling. Although I still have a certain weird affection for it. But Germany seems to be, science fiction in Germany seems to be in somewhat the position that science fiction was in the United States at the end of the 50s. It happened that I started to write science fiction pretty much exactly at the point that in 1977 that the first impact of punk culture was felt in North America. So
where did you live at that time?
I was living in Vancouver, and I happened to go back to Toronto on the East Coast. I was visiting these friends of mine who were, sort of old hippies, one kind or another, people my age. And there was this loud music. This is true. It's a funny story. There was this loud music like that we were hearing, but louder and very crude, coming from across the street. And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. That's punk stuff. You know about that punk stuff?" And I said, "No, what is it?" And they said, "Oh, it's just horrible. They've got safety pins through their noses. You can't play, and they're proud of it. And these little kids, it's really stupid." So I said, oh, okay. So I went over there and looked at it. I thought, this is great. What is it? And it was a bunch of kids from California had been brought in by the Ontario Art Institute or something. It was like the first big punk event in the city. I mean, it was brand new and nobody knew anything about it. So I went and talked to them. They were from different groups from Los Angeles. And I thought, God, that's very strange. Don't know what it is. And when I got back to Vancouver, a friend of mine had just come back from London with the Sex Pistols singles and a big stack of punk fanzines. And he's like he's a conceptual artist. And he's sitting there looking at this and saying, damn, this is weird. But, you know, I was sort of too old to take part. You know, I was just like a voyeur. It was very, very groovy voyeur action. It still is in a way, although watching the rapidity with which it was commodified by my peers, it's quite an astonishing experience. Until the other old hippies come in and, you know, turn it into product very quickly because they knew how to do it. It had been done to them. I don't know. I'm not really competent to judge its where it could be, you know, where it is in terms of literary advancement. But I think it's gone into it's established itself as historically as a tendency, at least in science fiction, and I think the tendency the tendency will continue. There's still echoes of it. Some of the women that Bruce named when he was talking today, who I actually haven't read, and the group of writers in England who call themselves techno-goths because they don't want to call themselves cyberpunk. So it's had something. I don't know. It's going to be a long time before its impact would actually be felt on the flabby central body of science fiction. One never knows.
It doesn't.